Hi everyone. My name is Jeremy Dalton, and I'm the author of a book called Reality Check. And I also lead the XR team for PwC UK, helping clients in different organizations and industries around the world use VR and AR for business purposes.
Great. And James?
Hi everyone, so my name's James. I work for a French tech startup called HRV Simulation, and we do like research development projects and then first level of commercialization. So we have a dental simulator that combines haptics and VR. We have ergonomic analysis that uses AR, and sort of mix of in-betweens with some of the research projects.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Actually, I got a question, James. Sorry to steal your thunder.
Go for it.
But actually, you mentioned the dental sim stuff. I've got a case study that I looked at from the University of Leeds. They used a system called the Simodont or something. Is there anything similar to that?
Yeah, so Simodont's a very similar machine. And so Leeds University is just in the process of purchasing some other simulators as well. So it's quite a good case study if you're working with them.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I'm looking forward to hearing the updates on that.
Yeah, it's great. We got something already. And that'll kind of lead me to my first question. I think, one of the things that was interesting to me about you guys is I think in both of your jobs, part of your responsibility is educating new clients and kind of showing them what's possible. And James, we can start with you here. As over the last couple of years, how would you describe the average mindset of these, of new clients that you're talking to when it comes to XR? What are their expectations? What are their preconceptions? What are they looking to do?
Oh, well, it completely depends on the client, to be honest. Like a lot of the work we do is first base with the universities. So the universities, the ones we work with tend to have some exposure to it, mainly from the students upwards, to be perfectly honest. So it's the students that sort of motivate lecturers, the professors to then get involved in it. And then because a lot of the work we do involves creation of 3D modeling with it as well, a lot of that's from the students upwards. So that's really where we work at it from the last few years.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I'd say I've got in the business world, I've seen a similar drive, a sort of grassroots drive where you've got you haven't got the business leaders in companies necessarily driving the usage of the technology because they're firefighting day-to-day issues and just trying to keep the lights on most of the time. I think it sort of goes back to that joke. If anyone's seen the chart where there's a question on the top and it says who is most responsible for driving transformation in your organization, and it shows you one of the options is CEO and it's got like 2% votes. The other one is COO and it's got like 3%, and then the third option is COVID-19 and that's got like 95% of the votes. So I think that the whole point of that is that businesses are being forced in some ways to adopt and innovate with these technologies. But before that, it was a grassroots initiative. It was being pushed from the ground up, with employees that see value in the technology and are bringing it to the businesses. I mean, I set up XR in PwC UK back in 2017 officially. And it required years and years of campaigning in the organization to get them to buy into the technology and finally, give me the remit to do this stuff.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And would you find that in general, like specifically with how you engage, are these lower level employees coming to you as sort of like, on an exploratory agenda for their company, or are they kind of telling their boss about it and their boss is coming to hire someone, to do something about it?
So from my perspective, I've seen a bit of both. I've seen senior business leaders try and ask about it. Equally, I've seen more junior employees also try and drive change, but that's obviously more difficult because they have a lot more hoops to go through in the bureaucratic sort of hierarchies of these organizations. But the key thing is, if they're what I've noticed across all the populations is that there is a massive lack of education when it comes to the technology, and a lack of understanding, and a belief that virtual reality is just this one point, definition, and augmented reality is this one thing, when in fact, they're spectrums of technologies. I don't know what you think, James.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, for us, like we've got on the industry side, which tends to be driven from the top, like say it more out of necessity than anything else. So with ergonomic analysis, for instance, it's replacing people doing checklists and being able to use AR so you can scan someone doing it, get live mannequin feedback, and then do the analysis afterwards. So it's like driven from the top forward, more from a cost saving perspective, and also from an evidence-based perspective. So when they go into insurances for claims, the technology actually allows them to have sort of the evidence for it. Whereas before you could debate that someone who's doing a checklist, they're doing it wrong.
That data-backed point is actually, I think, really key, because a lot of organizations and business leaders within those organizations will not invest without that backing. And if they do, it's usually it can be a bit of a disaster, because they can choose, they can sort of find themselves interested and excited by the technology, but for a gimmicky reason, simply because it's a bit of a novelty. Those types of projects, you can see them coming from a mile away, and they often cause problems for everyone involved, because what happens is you end up in this situation where the technology gets deployed in a fun way, sure, but not in a valuable way. It costs money, and the outcomes are kind of a bit meh at the end of the day. Nothing really changes. And then when it comes to analyzing what impact it's had and whether they're going to do it next time, the answer is usually no, because it wasn't significantly beneficial for the company. So the VR vendor or consultant that has done the work gets burnt, because they don't get any more work from that organization for this VR deployment. The business themselves sees virtual reality or augmented reality in a worse light, because it failed for them, so to speak, or it didn't really produce anything of true value.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And we talked to a lot of folks that are navigating that same kind of dynamic. Over the last couple of months in here, we've really had a focus on startups. And generally, these teams are very small. The founders are already extremely knowledgeable about VR. They're generally undercapitalized. They're risk-seeking. And you through PwC, you have access to a lot of these larger multinational corporations, and I would say probably on every axis, they're kind of the exact opposite, right? They're well capitalized, they're not well educated on this, they're risk averse, and I'm curious, of all the innovation that needs to happen kind of in the next few years, some of it's going to come from startups and some of it's going to come from big companies, and I'm wondering where you see kind of the optimal boundary between those two, and what's the dynamic of collaboration that you would like to see?
Yeah. Do you want to go, James, or shall I?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah. So the way I see it is you've got pros and cons to both types of organizations. As a startup, you can move faster. You can have a greater risk appetite. You can innovate and explore new things. And not to say you can't do that in larger organizations, but it usually takes longer, and there are more processes involved. There's more red tape around it. There's more bureaucracy to manage. There's more stakeholders to deal with. So things just tend to get slowed down, and there's not necessarily an appetite to try new things. Even if there is the time and the sort of buy-in to doing it. So what happens is you have this, you can find this beautiful middle ground where the larger organizations are getting their clients to buy into the technology, because there's a sense of trust there. I think from what I've seen, a lot of large organizations tend to trust larger companies. They have this idea that they've been more established and they've been around for a while. Not that that's necessarily true, by the way, but that is the perception that a lot of them have. And then with startups, you've got this this ability to experiment and break new ground. And so I think there's a great partnership there where startups effectively can supply a lot of this innovative software and thinking through to larger organizations that can then sell it in successfully to larger businesses.
Yeah, and I think from the startup perspective for us, I mean, it's like the markets is almost there, like the take-up's coming, the take-up's starting, but for us it's still, I guess, so necessary just from a sort of money perspective, I guess, to be working in so many different topics at the same time, because there's certain ones which stick and there's certain ones which pick up earlier, for us to be able to invest in the other areas and get through that sort of R&D phase. But we have, like, some of the industry partners we have, some of the bigger companies like Bosch and Siemens we've worked with in France are actually quite good in that they have their like almost incubator areas of the company, and they actually put money in to doing R&D projects with startups like us, which gives us funding and pays for good projects that we might not necessarily be able to do, and allows us to apply them to a really specific part of a larger company to then get the data and everything else from it to then reevaluate and make it better without too much risk.
That's great. Cool. I'm going to jump into the next question, which is 3 of 5. And so, James, I was looking at your consulting website, and I see you have experience, giving a set of talks. You have kind of your structure, your way of educating people. And then, Jeremy, also I've recently released this book. And so one of the things that immediately jumped out to me that, your two careers have in common is that thought leadership and personal brand building is an important ingredient. Jeremy, you want to start, maybe tell us a little bit about your experience writing your book in general, but also just the importance of, making those things a priority in your career.
Yeah, sure. So writing a book, for anyone who's thinking about it, it's a real pain in the ass. I'm not going to lie. It took me about, what was it? I signed the contract with the publisher back in September 2019. Delivered the book just before the end of 2020. And obviously, what happened in between. COVID-19 came in and sort of screwed things up. And it got to this point where my editor got furloughed. So I lost all enthusiasm in the project. And I thought the whole thing, the book's never going to see the light of day. It's a done project. And so I kind of gave up, to be honest, for about a 2 or 3 month period. I didn't write anything. The book was, half done, maybe a little bit more, 2/3 done. And then what happened is my editor got unfurloughed about 2 months later, or a few months later, and all of a sudden the deadline had passed that I had signed a contract for. So I really had a fire lit under me to try and sort out the last third of the book in time to get it published last month. And that was really hectic. That was, early morning before work, evenings after work, all weekend, morning to evening. I took annual leave, to keep on working at the book. And I pulled, for the first time ever, a triple all-nighter. So literally just went all night one night, carried on with the book the next day, had a rest in the afternoon for an hour, went back at it, went through the evening again, did the same thing, then went through the next evening and carried on. It was absolutely insane, a horrendous experience, but partly my fault, to be fair. So if anyone's writing a book, I think forward thinking and organization will put you in a good stead.
But was it worth it?
And I think I'll tell you in a few months' time whether it's worth it or not. It's only been out
Sure.
for a month. But I think you had a second question. I can't remember what it was now.
Well, the question was just in general, how do you
Brand
see the
building.
importance of personal brand building in your career?
Yes, that was it. So yeah, in context with this book, I suppose I have been trying to build a brand in the XR space officially probably since about 2014, something like that. And that was a lot of years of campaigning internally in PwC, a lot of presentations, a lot of playing around with the technology, and giving talks here and there, try experimenting with different virtual reality products and applications, writing some thoughts around it, what it can do now and in the future, where we think it's going. So all of this stuff eventually allowed me to develop this reputation within the firm as the VR guy. And that was quite good, because anytime any conversation came up with regard to virtual reality, they said, oh, well, Jeremy is the person for that. And so, it became it had a bit of a snowball effect where it was self-perpetuating. I'd gotten the motor started, but now it was carrying on its own. And I was supplementing it, of course, with more involvement in the space. And by 2017, I had built a business case to take forward to the head of technology and investments at the time, and thankfully they also saw the value in it and gave me this full-time role. But yeah, I would say if I hadn't built a brand for all those years prior to this opportunity coming up, then it would have been a much tougher sell, and I'm not even sure it would have happened, in all honesty. So it was kind of going back to making your own luck at the end of the day.
Sure.
You keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and you're not necessarily getting anywhere, but one day, a door will be open for you, and you can push through that, but you've just got to keep going with it.
Yeah, I could not agree with that more. I think even what we do here with Spatial Ape, just trying to put ourselves out there and extend our network, is really along a similar line. It makes a lot of sense to me. James, is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, for sure. I agree absolutely with the snowball effect of it. For me, I only really got involved in this field, about 3 or 4 years ago, after years and years of retail management, managing shops in the UK, in Scotland, and in London. And then getting involved, it's incredible. Like I say, if you can get known for something, just known as the techie guy, the guy who's involved in that. And then it's like the links which come from it. I had meeting with someone when this first started, 3-4 years ago. And then 2 years down the line, get a phone call. And then they just said, oh, look, you're the only person I know that's even talked about this stuff.
Totally.
And then that's what led to getting to a project with HNC, Hamad Medical Corporation, in Qatar, And it's just literally from those little links of putting yourself out there and showing that, you're willing to learn, you're willing to try new things, because it's always changing and it's never going to be perfect. And you got to show people that you don't know everything the way it is today, because like everything on here is a field which is still developing, and in 6 months it's completely different to where it was. And one of the things we talked about earlier, actually, about like educating the clients, for me, the huge thing with coronavirus and everything that's happened has actually been educating myself further, because before I'd be going to universities, be going to corporations and introducing them to this technology for the first time. But the last few months, it's been educating myself about, we can create 3D models of our simulators, of some of our products, and do those demos remotely using AR on their devices, And for me, that's what it is. It's just keep on learning about the stuff that's out there, because it keeps on changing.
Totally. And I think that's really representative of the fact that the industry did, for better or for worse, took a step forward this year, certainly. And I think, you guys have been particularly successful at it, but this approach of just, putting yourself out there and building brand and network for the long haul, we interview week after week guests that are really successful doing that. And so anyone watching it, definitely kind of recommend that strategy and approach. So the next question I'm going to ask you, question 4 or 5 is, you've now both collectively seen countless number of R&D pilots and use cases that have been tried by big corporations. And at the end of the day, what these big companies want is they want a machine that can take $1 and turn it into $2. And I know that we're very early on in, this whole XR thing, but what do you see, I'll say for the next year or 2 years, being the use cases that most closely achieve, that goal of being able to turn $1 into $2 consistently?
So I would say that it's not only about taking $1 and turning it into $2, but there's also a play around spending $3 instead of $4, for example, in an organization, or taking 1 hour to make $1 instead of 2 hours to make $1. So there are these efficiency plays, there are these cost-saving plays, and as you mentioned, there are these revenue growth plays. These are all drivers of business initiatives. No matter what business you're in, you're going to be motivated by one or probably all of these different drivers. And the interesting thing is, it's not necessarily been only the revenue drivers that have really pulled at the strings of these organizations when they come and talk to us. So I've seen a lot of excitement in the space of soft skills training, for example. And funnily enough, the organizations or the industries that you might have thought that had a real sort of it was just obvious. The business case of virtual reality was obvious. Those industries have not necessarily been the most popular ones that I've seen personally, and other industries that you might think, well, there might not be the strongest use cases here. I'm thinking about financial services, but they've actually been the most popular industry to come and talk to us about the value of virtual reality and augmented reality. So they are really excited about it. And soft skills in particular is one big area that they want to use this technology for. So things like, unconscious bias training, things like leadership training, all of this sort of stuff, because doing that training in the real world costs a hell of a lot of money and requires a lot of time as well. You've got to bring in, actors that are doing these role play scenarios with you, and those are incredibly time consuming to organize and do. And they're not very scalable, because you can only, if you have one actor, they're only going to be able to work with, one or a few individuals. So there are some really exciting plays there with digital avatars in virtual reality, immersing you in these circumstances and situations that make you feel emotional in some way to help you manage that when those scenarios happen in the real world.
And James, what about you? What do you think is the highest ROI corporate use case going into this year?
Yeah, well, I mean, for us, the stuff that's ready. I mean, we did a project with Unilever opening up a shop on Sloane Square. That's obviously a year or so ago now. But it opened up things that they couldn't do before. So like there, we were training up a team for, was it the first Pure Leaf shop that opened there? So we modeled the shop inside while it was under construction. So the staff couldn't actually go into the shop. The construction was overran. So it was literally going to be built a couple of days before they had to start. So then the modelization meant that the staff could still get trained
I gotta leave.
into the shop, into where things are, into how to operate it. And that's something they wouldn't have been able to do. It literally just would have meant the shop couldn't open until the staff came in, had a few days training on site, and then did it. So I think it opens up even more opportunities that weren't there before. And then for us, the thing that's been ready this year has been ergonomic analysis. Like I say, replacing people with clipboards. And it's almost waiting for the technology just to be accurate enough. Because at the moment we use like motion capture suits, and we've gone from the AR kit, which wasn't accurate enough, to be honest, to the LiDAR on Apple, which is there, it's very close to being there, but it's still not quite as accurate as a 12-piece motion capture suit, obviously. But yeah, that absolutely. And then on the dentistry, we're there on the technology front. We can do better than what they've got at the moment. So they can do treatments on a virtual patient as opposed to a real patient in the clinic. And it's better than the plastic teeth. But then on that side, it is the cost of the equipment, it's the cost of the investment. And then the return on that's only really in specific cases, like we went into Spain last year in Mallorca. And for them, it's the payback's been fantastic because they've been the first university in the whole of Spain. They've ended up on all the news channels in Spain, and then they've made all their money back by attracting all the students to a dental university in Mallorca that perhaps people wouldn't have heard of otherwise.
You know what I find really pertinent about some of the stuff you said, James? That point about the LiDAR, being it's there pretty much, but it's still not as good as the 12-piece motion capture suit. The wonderful thing, though, is because it's far more accessible to the wider population, we are far more likely to see a lot of people engage with that technology now. And because we're having more people engage with the technology, the business case for developers to start playing around with it, creating new applications, and even for Apple and other organizations like that to research and improve it is growing by the day. So it's just again, similar to what we were talking about before, a sort of snowball effect in this arena of the technology improving, even though there is existing technology that is better than it, but not as accessible as it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the barriers are going down day by day.
Exactly. That's what we want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And just to leave off, the last question I'll ask is, what's the best place to keep in touch with you guys? And Jeremy, where do we buy your book?
So if you want to check out Reality Check and grab a copy, you can go to realitycheckxr.com. And actually for we're streaming this live, right?
That's right. Yep.
So okay, this is what I'm going to do. If anyone wants a discount code here for the book, just message me afterwards. I'm on LinkedIn. You can search for Jeremy Dalton, or on Twitter, Jeremy Dalton XR. Happy to give you one. And if you know any professors or lecturers teaching XR or business innovation, then there's also an academic program where you can get the book for free through the publisher, which is great as well.
Awesome. What about you, James?
Well, for me, probably best is LinkedIn, and then you'll be able to link to all the different companies we work with and all the projects we're doing. But I did get Jeremy's book a couple of weeks ago, so I can highly recommend that for him.
Oh, nice. Oh, glad you got a copy, James. Thanks a lot for mentioning
Awesome.
that.